What's up, everyone? Welcome back to these Black History Nuggets. We are in episode 6 as we have been unpacking Black history from the Bible over this last 6 days, 5 days. Today makes 6 days, and we will be unpacking for the entire month of February. We ended yesterday talking about, we were answering the question, were the children of Israel really in Egyptian bondage for 400 years? And we ended off learning that the children of Israel were in Egypt 215 years, and they were in Canaan for 215 years. And I ended yesterday's message talking about how even though they were in Egypt for 215 years, they were not in bondage for 215 years. Well, how do we know that? How do we know that they were not in bondage for 215 years? Well, the Bible tells us in the book of Exodus, chapter 7, and verse 7, that Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. So when Moses would lead the children of Israel out of Egypt, Moses was 80 years old. So what does that have to do with them being in Egyptian bondage less than 215 years? Well, if you look at the beginning of the chapter in Exodus chapter 1, we find that the children of Israel in Exodus chapter 1, and if you look, begin around verse 6, it says, better yet, verse 5, Exodus chapter 1 and verse 5, all those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, all his brothers and all that generation. But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And it happen, in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were in dread of the children of Israel. And so the children of Israel are in Egypt. Joseph dies. A new Pharaoh comes in who does not know Joseph. At that time, because the children of Israel are multiplying, the Pharaoh begins to put them in bondage. And so this is when the bondage begins. When you continue on in the text, when you jump down to verse 15, it says, then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shipra and the name of the other Puah. And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, then you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, then you shall live, then she shall live. And so at the time, now if you continue in the text, at this time, the Pharaoh has commissioned the Hebrew midwives to kill the young Hebrew babies, young Hebrew babies. When you get to chapter 2, it tells us that Moses is born. So Moses is born sometime during this period. Now we know that it's sometime during this period because he's killing the Hebrew babies. That's the first thing. And then on top of that, if you turn over to Acts chapter 7 in verse 17, in Acts chapter 7 and verse 17, it says, but when the time of the promise drew near, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt, till another king arose who did not know Joseph. This man dealt treacherously with our people and oppressed our forefathers, making them expose their babies so that they might not live. At this time, Moses was born. Now, I want you to notice it's talking about one specific Pharaoh. All right. It says, this king arose who did not know Joseph. This king. This man dealt treacherously with our people and oppressed our forefathers, making them expose their babies so that they might not live. At this time, during the time of this king, Moses was born and was well pleasing to God. And so Moses is born at the same time that this persecution is taking place. So if Moses is born at the time the persecution is taking place, and Moses leads the children of Israel out of Egypt at the age of 80, when he's 80 years old, that means that the children of Israel could not have been in bondage no more than 80 or so years. 80 or so years. The children of Israel could not have been in Egyptian bondage for more than 80 or so years. And so, if the children of Israel were not in Egyptian bondage for more than 80 or so years, that would have to lead us to believe that in Genesis chapter 15, in verse 13, let's go there. Genesis chapter 15, verse 13, which is the text that we began with. In Genesis 15, in verse 13, where it says, "Then he said to Abram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years." So, when we read that text, we typically, like as I said before, we typically think of that text being referring to the children of Israel being in Egyptian bondage for 400 years. But we just learned that the children of Israel, first of all, they were not in Egypt for 400 years. They also were not in Egyptian bondage for 400 years. They were in Egypt for 215 years. They were in bondage for 80 plus years, which means that Genesis 15:13 cannot be referring to the children of Israel being in Egyptian bondage for 400 years. If you notice, the text says, know certainly that your descendants, it doesn't say the children of Israel, it doesn't say the Israelites, it says that Abram's descendants, those who are from the lineage of Shem, would be Abram's descendants. It says, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs. It doesn't say that they will be strangers in Egypt. It says that they will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. So if the text is not talking about the children of Israel, who could it be talking about? Well, I can imagine some of y'all are, you read the text and you get to verse 14 and you say, well, it says, and also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward, they shall come out with great possessions. And many people will read that text and they will think that it's talking about when the children of Israel left and the Egyptians gave them, quote unquote, great possessions. But if you turn over to Isaiah chapter 60, if you turn over to Isaiah chapter 60, we see that the children of Israel are also given wealth from the Gentiles. In Isaiah chapter 60, in verse 1, it says, arise, shine, for your light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and deep darkness the people. But the Lord will arise over you, and his glory will be seen upon you. The Gentiles shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. Lift up your eyes all around and see. They all gather together. They come to you. Your son shall come from afar, and your daughter shall be nursed at your side. Then you shall see and become radiant, and your heart shall swell with joy, because the abundance of the sea shall be turned to you. The wealth of the Gentiles shall come to you. The wealth of the Gentiles shall come to you. And then it continues on, and then I'm going to jump down to verse 11, where it says, as a matter of fact, verse 10, the sons of foreigners shall build up your walls, and their kings shall minister to you. For in my wrath I struck you, but in my favor I have had mercy on you. Therefore your gates shall be open continually. They shall not be shut day or night, that men may bring to you the wealth of the Gentiles and their kings in procession. And so we're told here that the wealth of the Gentiles will come to God's people. And so when you read Genesis chapter 12, now we have to understand that the Bible doesn't contradict itself. And so if Genesis chapter 15 and verse 13 tells us that the children of Israel, better yet, tells us that Abram's descendants would be strangers in a land that is not theirs for 400 years, and they will be afflicted during that time, and they will serve the people that are in those lands. If we know that the children of Israel were not in Egyptian bondage for 400 years, that means that Genesis 15:13 and verse 14 cannot be referring to them. It is impossible for it to happen because the children of Israel were not in Egypt for more than 215 years. They were not in Egyptian bondage for more than 80 or so years, which means that Genesis 15:13 is talking about someone else. It's talking about someone else. But why is this important? It's important because if you ever played the game Jenga, then you know that you have these little wood pieces that are stacked up. And when you pull out one piece, if you pull out the wrong piece, then the entire structure collapses. It's the same thing here with Genesis 15 and verse 13. The entire narrative has been that Genesis 15:13 is talking about the children of Israel. If Genesis 15:13 is not talking about the children of Israel, if we pull out that piece from the narrative, then it makes the entire structure, the entire narrative, the entire belief system crumble, because it means that Genesis 15:13 has to be talking about some other group of people that are descendants of Abraham, that are somewhere in the world. They have been oppressed for 400 years. And if they are descendants of Abraham, that means that they are the children of Israel. If they are the children of Israel, that means that those individuals have to be treated differently than the other people. You see, why is this important? Right now, in Israel, they are fighting over a land. They're fighting over land that the quote unquote Jewish people say is theirs. Okay, they're fighting over land that the Jewish people say is theirs. Now, also, if you think about the fact that if the Jewish people are not native to that land, and we're going to get to that later, if they are not God's chosen people, or they are not the people that are referred to in Genesis 15 and verse 13, that has to lead you to wonder, who is it talking about? Who is it talking about? So they're fighting over a land really that does not belong to them. The Palestinians don't own that land. The quote unquote Jewish people don't own that land either, because those are not the people that are referred to in Genesis 15 verse 13. We also have to think of it like this. One of the reasons why this country supports, the main reason why this country, especially the evangelicals in this country, support Israel, is because in Genesis chapter 12, the Bible says that God will bless those who bless Israel. God will bless those who bless Israel. And so this country, the evangelicals as well, are very protective of Israel, because they believe that God is going to bless those who bless Israel. This is important. Genesis 15 verse 13 is important for us to understand who the real children of Israel are, because we need to understand, and the powers that be need to understand, that they are blessing, they are shielding, they are protecting the wrong people. The wrong people. The people that they are oppressing, they have to understand, are the people that God says they ought to be blessing. The people that they are currently oppressing all around the world are the people that God says they ought to be blessing. And so this is one of the reasons why this information is so important. We are going to unpack this a little bit more in our next episode tomorrow, and I pray that you were blessed by today's episode.